Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. The United States offers NATO-style security guarantees to Ukraine as talks with European and Ukrainian officials show progress towards ending the war. US envoys warn the offer is time-limited with no agreement yet on territorial concessions. Philippine immigration says the father and son behind Australia's deadly Bondi Beach attack spent most of November in the country. Officials say the father entered the Philippines as an Indian national before returning to Australia. Los Angeles police charged the son of filmmaker Rob Reiner with the murder of his parents after they're found dead at their home. Authorities say the 32-year-old suspect is in custody without bail as the investigation continues. President Donald Trump sues the BBC for defamation over edited footage of a January the 6th speech that he says misrepresents his words. Trump seeks up to $10 billion in damages after the BBC admits an error editing, but denies any legal basis for the claim. The US military says it carries out strikes on 3 vessels in international waters in the Eastern Pacific, killing 8 people. US Southern Command says intelligence shows the boats are operating along known narco-trafficking routes. President Donald Trump says he has asked Chinese leader Xi Jinping to consider releasing Hong Kong pro-democracy tycoon Jimmy Lai after his conviction under the national security law. The UK also calls for Lai's immediate release, describing the case as politically motivated. Appeals judges at the International Criminal Court reject an Israeli challenge to the court's investigation into the Gaza war. The judges rule the prosecution may examine alleged crimes following the October the 7th Hamas attack on Israel. Police renew a manhunt for the gunman who kills 2 students and injures 7 others in a classroom shooting at Brown University. Officers go door-to-door for surveillance footage after releasing a person of interest previously detained. For our top story, we start in the United States, and US President Donald Trump says his administration is reviewing whether Israel violated the Gaza ceasefire by killing a Hamas leader. Trump also confirmed that the International Stabilization Force for Gaza is already operational. He says more countries are joining the effort and that additional troops can be deployed if requested. Speaking from the Oval Office, Trump emphasized that the mission is active and ready to expand as needed to maintain stability in the region. Tensions remain high over Hamas disarmament, the next phase of the Gaza ceasefire plan, and violence in the West Bank, which the White House says risks derailing peace efforts. Let's take a listen in to the US President Donald Trump.
Israel and I have gotten along very well. My relationship with Bibi Netanyahu has been obviously a very good one. Look, we took out Iran. We wiped out, with that plane right there, we wiped out the B-2 bomber, we wiped out the Iran nuclear threat, and because of that, we were able to make peace in the Middle East. No, we've had a very good relationship with Israel. We actually have a very good relationship with just about everybody in the Middle East. I think that it's, in a form, it's already running. In a very strong form, it's already, but it'll get stronger and stronger, and more countries are coming into it. They're already in. But they'll send any number of troops that I ask them to send. They want to see peace. We have more than 59 countries. We have many countries that aren't even in the Middle East, but they're fairly close to the Middle East. They want to be involved. So it's been.
We're now joined by Professor Rohan Gunaratne, an international affairs expert, joining us live from Singapore. Professor Gunaratne, it's always a pleasure. Let's first of all start off with the assassination of Syed, which happened just a couple of days ago. Hamas, of course, saying that violates the ceasefire. Donald Trump now says that he's looking into it. From a legal and diplomatic point of view, does a targeted killing during a truce constitute a material breach? Professor Gunaratne, I believe that you're on mute.
Certainly, Thomas, the IDF killing of Saad, who was the head of weapons manufacturing, who was trying to restore Hamas capabilities, is a breach of the ceasefire. But at the same time, one must look at Israel's thinking at this point. Israel wants to protect its national security. They do not want a man of that level who also directed one of the co-directors of the October 7th, 2023 massacre to live. So that is why IDF mounted that operation. So technically, it is a breach, but IDF position is those who directed and those who participated in that massacre, they are walking dead. So IDF will kill them whether they are in Gaza or whether they are overseas. This is the Israeli thinking.
And Israel, of course, argues that such strikes are preemptive and defensive. How does ceasefire survive if one side reserves the right to kill leaders, like Israel have done here, after a deal is in place? And how do you think Donald Trump has received this?
Israeli thinking after October 7th is what is called preemption. That is, wherever they identify a threat, wherever they identify a build-up of threat, they will preemptively strike. The Israeli doctrine is to rise and kill. But as you said very clearly, it is going to have issues of taking this ceasefire forward. And of course, Trump himself, he is very supportive of the Israeli position, but it will be very difficult for him to explain to his friends in Qatar, in Turkey, and in Egypt, the mediators, as to why Israel is doing it.
Yeah, and finally, of course, a huge topic in regards to moving on to the next phase of the Gaza ceasefire, Hamas disarmament. How realistic do you think that is at this stage? We, of course, see ongoing violence inside the Gaza Strip, both with Israeli forces and also internally as well. Do you think this is a precondition that it could collapse the next phase?
I'm monitoring the Hamas media, their official media and their social media. Hamas has no intention to disarm. Hamas is committed to continuing the fight. And I believe that the next phase, which is the disarmament and the demobilization phase, there will be a lot of challenges. But again, what is important is for the United States to work with the mediators, Israel to work with the mediators, and ensure that Hamas disarms and there is entire military demobilization in Gaza. It is not only Hamas. There are 8 other groups that worked with Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian Mujahideen Brigade, a number of other groups that carry weapons today in Gaza. So this will be the toughest of the peace process at this point.
Let's go back to Trump. Do you think he's working as a neutral arbiter here, or just a manager of Israeli security?
Trump is totally against terrorism. Also, Iran, the same group that sponsored Hamas, tried to kill him more than once. So certainly Trump is with Israel, but at the same time, he wants to give a fair deal to the Palestinians. And he has told the Israelis that they must agree to a 2-state solution, no annexation of West Bank. So I think that Trump is the only man who is at this point who is taking the peace process forward. If there's no Trump, there'll be continuous war and fighting.
Yes, Professor Gunaratne, stay with us as we have further developments. The International Criminal Court has rejected an appeal by Israel challenging its investigation into the Gaza war. Judges upheld a lower court decision allowing prosecutors to examine alleged crimes following the October the 7th attacks by Hamas. The ruling means the ICC investigation continues and arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant remain in place. Israel rejects the court's jurisdiction, calling the decision a violation of its sovereign rights. Meanwhile, Gaza continues to face dire humanitarian conditions after the conflict. Okay, of course, this is a hugely significant development. The International Criminal Court, one of the judicial arms of the United Nations, where Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant have arrest warrants out for war crimes at The Hague, have rejected Israel's appeal. Israel appealed to the International Criminal Court to halt this investigation when it came to Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip. Professor Gunaratne joins us once again. The ICC has rejected Israel's appeal here and allowed the Gaza investigation to continue. How significant is this ruling for international law?
ICC ruling is very significant because, as you said, Thomas, it is the legal arm of the United Nations. But at the same time, for Israel, it is national security first and international law second. So Israel will work very closely with the United States to ensure that there are no further proceedings. And of course, Trump himself is threatening ICC on this ruling. So I believe that it will be very tough for ICC to move forward.
Yeah, and Israel says the ICC has no jurisdiction. If that argument holds to Israel, does that mean any state can opt out of accountability?
I believe that it will be very difficult for Israel or any country to say that ICC has no jurisdiction. ICC was established for this very reason. But at the same time, Israel should argue that it is Hamas-led groups that first mounted a brutal terrorist attack, a massacre, and that they are responding to that threat. All these terrorist groups, ICC and the international judicial bodies should take into consideration that states are only reacting and responding to terrorist attacks. Of course, Israel's response has been very brutal, has been overwhelming, but there was no genocide. Israel did not kill the Palestinians, the 2 million Palestinians or the Arabs working in Israel. So this genocide story has no basis. There's no foundation for anyone to say that Israel committed genocide. Of course, Israel did use excessive force, but with the specific intention of dismantling Hamas and the other terrorist groups.
Well, of course, Professor Gunaratne, that case is going on at the International Court of Justice, but we'll see. We now move on next, and former Australian Prime Minister John Howard has paid tribute to the victims of the Bondi Beach shooting, joining mourners at the site of the attack that shocked the nation. Howard laid flowers and observed a moment of silence at Bondi Beach, where 15 people were killed in what authorities describe as Australia's worst mass shooting in nearly 30 years. The attack is being investigated as terrorism targeting the Jewish community. Howard, who introduced Australia's gun restrictions in 1996, said the focus must remain on confronting anti-Semitism, warning against allowing gun law debates to distract from the broader threat of hate. Meanwhile, in the United States, New York City Mayor Eric Adams addressed the Jewish community during a Hanukkah event, urging people not to live in fear. Adams encouraged Jewish New Yorkers to practice their faith openly and visibly, saying hatred must never force communities to hide their identity. He later joined the menorah lighting in a show of solidarity. Professor Gunaratne joins us once again. Of course, a hugely significant day just 2 days ago when this attack happened, not just for Jews in Australia, but of course around the world. Your thoughts on the response from the Australian government? Of course, Australia already has one of the tightest some of the tightest gun laws in the entire world. Now they're talking of tightening them further. Your analysis on the response of Albanese and his government post this tragedy?
Thomas, what we have seen is that the Prime Minister of Australia is very committed to reassuring the Jews that they can practice their faith openly in Australia. What is significant is that liberal democracies permit freedom of expression, freedom of demonstration, freedom of protest. And this has been exploited by the Islamists. So in this case, the ISIS or the Islamic State network in Australia, since 2019, Naveed Akram has been a part of that network. And of course, both he and his father traveled to the Philippines for 1 month in November, received the training and came back to stage this attack. So I believe that it is so important for Australia to dismantle the Salafi jihadi infrastructure that is intact in Sydney, in the very heart of Sydney. There are preachers who are still active, such as Wadid Haddad, who radicalized the Bondi Beach shooter. These people should be investigated more and action taken. If governments, because of liberal democracy and their values, are unwilling to act against extremists, then their countries will suffer from terrorism like what we have witnessed.
Professor Gunaratne, this was an extremely terrible instance of anti-Semitism. There is absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. However, does focusing too heavily on that risk missing the role of extremist ideology and transnational terror networks, or are these threats now inseparable?
I think that they are now the same, because the transnational ideologies have now taken root globally. Extremism is a global phenomenon. It's no longer restricted to the Middle East where it emerged. But today, every country from Britain to continental Europe to North America to Australia, New Zealand, they are all suffering from extremism. So I think governments should take a very decisive step. What is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of protest, versus what are the activities that promote hatred, prejudice, suspicion, resentment, anger, and violence. And those demonstrations, protests, preaching venues, they should be shut down, and those preachers should be blacklisted as hate preachers, and appropriate action should be taken against them. That has not happened in the Western world. It has not happened adequately in the liberal democracies.
Yes, Professor Gunaratne, do stay with us once again as we move over next to Europe. And Britain's military chief has said that the country must get better prepared to deter the threat of conflict, particularly from Russia, by encouraging people to be willing to fight, increasing industrial weapons capacity and developing skills. Air Chief Marshal Richard Knighton, Chief of the Defence Staff, has said that Britain has yet to feel the threat from Russia as acutely as many of their allies in Europe, which had already moved to increase defence procurement and in some cases return to a form of national service. Let's in fact listen in to the military chief's comments.
A new era for defence doesn't just mean our military and government stepping up, as we are. It means our whole nation stepping up. And to do that, we need to contribute to that national conversation and bring these issues into the mainstream, just as our allies in many countries in Europe have done.
Professor Gunaratne, of course, we're seeing a NATO hike of 5% in GDP on defence spending, along with, of course, drone incursions into eastern NATO members, rising tensions in Europe. However, the UK has not felt the Russian threat as acutely as Eastern Europe has in these last 2 years. Do you think that means Britain has become complacent?
Britain is now waking up to this threat, as you rightly said, Thomas. Eastern Europe, they are very much aware of threat of invasion, threat of foreign interference from Russia. But Western Europe and the United Kingdom is now planning and preparing itself to confront the challenges posed by Russia. They will have national service. They are, of course, they have ramped up their defense production. So I believe that Europe will once again will emerge as a very significant military power after 3 or 4 decades of going to sleep. So I think that the Americans will work very closely with the Europeans to confront the Russian threat unless there is agreement on Ukraine. And that is what Trump is working very hard. Trump wants to do business with Russia, but this business will not work until and unless there's a resolution of the Ukrainian dispute.
Yes, Professor Gunaratne, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. For our next story, we move over to Latin America, and Chilean President Gabriel Boric has welcomed President-elect Jose Antonio Cast at Le Mondila Palace for the first official meeting since Cast's election victory. The meeting marks a historic political shift for Chile, as Cast has won presidential runoff with a commanding 58% of the votes, defeating the government-backed leftist candidate Jeanette Jara, who has secured 42% of the vote and quickly conceded. The result represents Chile's sharpest rightward turn since the end of military dictatorship in 1990. The transition meeting signals the beginning of the handover process between Boric's left-leaning administration and Cast's incoming right-wing government. Let's listen in to what Boric and Cast had to say.
Este gobierno de emergencia también tiene que verse reflejado en un gobierno de unidad nacional en los temas prioritarios. Y en eso yo creo que todos vamos a estar de acuerdo, que hay ciertas situaciones que nos afectan transversalmente en temas de seguridad, en temas de salud, en temas de educación, en temas de vivienda, que requieren políticas de Estado.
Como presidente de la República puedo decirles que durante estos años hemos trabajado sin descanso para que la vida de los chilenos y chilenas sea más justa, más digna y más próspera. Y vamos a continuar esta labor hasta el último día del mandato que nos otorgará el pueblo de Chile, que es el 11 de marzo del 2026. Y al próximo gobierno le corresponderá continuar muchas de las políticas iniciadas y acordadas en estos años, que son tareas de Estado, como la implementación de la reforma de pensiones, la reforma de permisos sectoriales, la instalación del Ministerio de Seguridad Pública.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has criticized Chile's president-elect Jose Antonio Castin in a government broadcast, accusing him of being a Nazi and issuing warnings over potential actions against Venezuelan migrants residing in Chile. Let's take a listen in to what Maduro had to say.
Ahora el pueblo de Chile tiene un gran reto. El pueblo de Chile es un pueblo noble, progresista, es un pueblo hermoso. ¿Ves? Tiene un gran reto porque va a tener a un presidente nazi pinochetista. Tiene un gran reto. Nosotros no nos metemos en eso. Son asuntos internos de Chile. Lo que sí yo me meto es decirle a este señor Kapp, usted podrá ser seguidor de Hitler y educado en los valores de Hitler. Usted podrá ser pinochetista, convicto y confeso, pero cuidadito, le toca un pelo a un venezolano. A los venezolanos se respeta. Cuidadito. Escúchenme bien, ¿no? El que se mete con Venezuela se seca y usted se puede secar aceleradamente, señor K. Se los digo desde Caracas, capital que vio parir a los gigantes de América.
Tesla's board members have earned over $3 billion through stock awards, far exceeding pay given to peers at other top US tech firms. Elon Musk's brother, Kimball, has earned nearly $1 billion. Directors have not received new stock grants since 2020, but the value of earlier stock awards skyrocketed with Tesla's rising stock price. Between 2018 and 2020, Tesla directors received an average of $12 million in compensation, 8 times more than Alphabet's directors. The company paid directors in stock options, a practice criticized for magnifying upside potential with no downside risks. Tesla defends the pay, saying it's tied to stock performance, but governance experts warn it undermines directors' independence. We're now joined by Tutu Dewan, an automobile expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Tutu, for joining us here on the program. Tesla's board has made over $3 billion from stock awards, far more than other peers. In practical terms, does this compensation structure incentivize good oversight, or just stock price optimization? Hello? Can you hear me? Okay, we believe to have some problems there with some network. So the Tesla board members have earned over $3 billion this year, far exceeding the pay given to other peers at top US tech firms. Elon Musk's brother, for example, has earned nearly $1 billion. Directors have not received new stock grants since 2020, but the value of earlier stock awards skyrocketed with Tesla's rising stock price. Okay, we are moving on. Apologies. At least 4 people were killed and 25 others injured in a major multi-vehicle accident on the Delhi-Agra Expressway in India's Mathura. Dense fog caused 7 buses and 3 cars to collide, with some vehicles catching fire. Rescue teams, including fire services and ambulances, rushed to the scene to transport the injured to local hospitals. Officials say none of the injured are in serious condition. Relief operations do continue, and authorities are investigating the cause of the crash. Parts of Canada's British Columbia are facing a heightened flood threat as heavy rainfall combined with snow melt pushes river levels higher across the region. Orange level rainfall warnings are in effect for parts of the West and Central Fraser Valley, including Abbotsford and Chilliwack, as well as the Skagit Valley. Officials warn up to 80 millimeters of rain could fall in higher elevations. In Abbotsford, flooding was visible on Monday, with farmland underwater, machinery sitting in flooded fields, and several roads partially submerged or closed, while some floodwaters have receded, allowing authorities to lift or downgrade evacuation orders. Dozens of properties remain under evacuation alerts, with agricultural areas among the hardest hit. Residents in low-lying areas are being urged to stay alert as conditions continue to change. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.